coalition bombardment, signaling mounting pressure on the Iraqi army's forward positions in the north. But in places, that pressure seems to have missed the mark. In Kalak, craters suggest all those bombs' high explosive punch did little more than rearrange rocks on the hillside, well below Iraqi trenches. And when planes aren't flying overhead, Iraqi soldiers don't appear to be particularly alarmed. Well away from the front, U.S. paratroopers of the 173rd Airborne Brigade are settling into their new surroundings and await the arrival of heavier equipment. Other Americans have gone into action in the north, helping Kurdish fighters pursue the Islamist radicals in Ansar al-Islam, a hardline group that has been linked to Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda network. Here, at least, resistance was overcome. Despite the appearance of the war moving to the north, the coalition is far from having all its pieces in place here. According to Kurdish intelligence sources, there are more than 120,000 Iraqi soldiers arrayed in the north. The latest estimate for the number of U.S. troops here is 1/100th of that. Ben Wiedemann, CNN, Kalak, northern Iraq.
Now stuck in the mud after vicious sandstorms brought their move on Baghdad to a shuddering halt. The strain is starting to show on supply lines. Stretched to the limit, the infantry is running short of food.
Food right now, 1 meal a day until supply comes, resupply.
And how long is that going to be?
We don't know. Hopefully soon.
But it's not just food that's a problem. These tanks do half a mile to the gallon, and their advance has outrun their supplies. The convoy's to stop for up to a week, whilst the food and the fuel, the bullets and the bombs catch them up.
It's just that we've moved a long way from Kuwait, and our supply lines are stretched, and we're just making sure that we have the right pieces in place to make it all the way to Baghdad.
And all this whilst the Marines have been coming under constant ambush from small but determined groups of Iraqi fighters. They're embattled and growing jittery. It's a sign of the nervousness here that a group of Marines opened fire on a civilian vehicle after hearing what they thought was a gunshot. Later it emerged the car had simply backfired. All 3 occupants were killed. Edgy and underfed, the world's most powerful army is now regrouping. Its confidence dented. The march on Baghdad currently on hold. David Willis, BBC News, Central Iraq.
So it recently occurred in Baghdad city. A huge explosion rocking an area close to the Iraqi Information Ministry. Television pictures showing a fire ablaze at the back of the shopping centre, which is close to the ministry, just minutes after the blast which jolted the city centre. The Information Ministry, of course, was hit by at least 1 missile early on Saturday morning, and it's not immediately clear if that ministry has actually been hit in this new raid, but we do believe that it has. Abu Dhabi television is telling us that residential buildings are situated very close to the press centre. It's not clear whether or not there are any casualties. An Al Jazeera television reporter there says the explosion was caused by a missile fired from an aircraft which was flying at high speed and at low altitude.
There was a base of fire operation. They're entering in at night. Now, obviously, you're going to see some flashes, and I'll try to stop the camera. Right here, freeze frame. Okay, you saw that flash right here. That is not a concussion grenade. Go ahead and roll tape. You'll see another one right here. Stop tape down in this region. What that is overpressure and also blinding light to disorient and stun the occupants without killing them. It's a less lethal method. Go ahead and roll tape. Now they're going room to room. They're trying to maintain control of the people, but unfortunately, one of the stun grenades, go ahead and stop tape, right here, probably interacted with bedding, carpet, drapery, or whatever, and caused a fire. Go ahead and roll tape. As they continue to prosecute the objective and sort out if people are in there or if they're not, you see the fire will start to take hold. And as the men will file out here through the back stairwell, you'll see one of them is engulfed in flames. Go ahead and stop tape. And that's because the load-bearing equipment that a lot of these men wear, you can see that, you know, it would be like their H harnesses and the kind of load-bearing equipment they've got on is made of nylon. Go ahead and roll tape. And it obviously caught fire. So the hazards in this kind of close fighting vastly exceed the normal kind of land warfare that you see in open spaces.
Finding that generals dig in for a long war. There's been lots of talk about whether there's been a brief pause in this war. That's not what you're seeing, is it?
No, Becky, it isn't, and it's difficult for me to comment on anything outside our theater of operations. As you say, we're actually less than 100 miles south, or excuse me, less than 100 kilometers south of the southern suburbs of Baghdad. In that direction, just a few kilometers to the east of us, there's been a whale of a fight this morning. 2nd Brigade of the U.S. Army's 3rd Division has taken a strategic Euphrates River crossing, moved towards the direction of the Iraqi city of Hilla, which is, as I say, perhaps 80 or 90 kilometers south of Baghdad. We've seen all morning multiple launch rocket systems sending out high explosives in that direction, trying to dislodge the Iraqis in the area of Al-Hilla. The difficulty, of course, particularly in some of these Iraqi cities, is that the Republican Guard units have moved into the heart of the cities, into the commercial districts, and into residential districts, and there the Iraqis set up their artillery and their surface-to-air missiles and use the sanctuary of residential and business areas to shoot at the U.S. forces. Now, I'm with the 7th Cavalry. Again, we're even further north than the 3rd Infantry Division, closer to Baghdad. Having said that, we have set up a large arc around us. There is, across the horizon out there, perhaps 20 or so kilometers of tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles spread out, protecting the 3rd Infantry Division. And again, more or less a blocking motion. We are hearing fighting fairly constantly. So while there may be pauses in other areas of the front, that has not been the case around Al-Hilla and the area, as I say, probably 80 kilometers south of Baghdad.
Stone has been observing the coalition lessons and filed this report.
Next one, PMR3.
British Royal Engineers showing us at CNN Kuwait how not to fall prey to warfare's dirtiest trick, mines. The coalition says its forces aren't using mines now, but the engineers say there may be 10 million Iraqi-laid mines around Iraq. Mines newly planted and others left over from Iraq's 2 wars in the last quarter century. British engineers are charged with clearing living and working space in southern Iraq for troops, aid workers, and Iraqi civilians, and marking off danger areas with signs that look uncomfortably like grave markers. Not only mines, but unexploded munitions. They say 1 in every 5 bombs, bomblets, and artillery shells doesn't go off, and lies in wait, sometimes years, for the unwary or unlucky.
All you need to see is something.
This team will be showing people how to spot danger and stay away from it. And if you get caught in a minefield, how to get out in one piece.
After we've extracted, however long that may be, you're going to get civilian mine clearance teams to come in and clear the area. And that could take years. Absolutely.
Mines are expensive to clear, but cheap to buy. Humanitarian organizations say there are 100 million of them planted around the world, and 9 out of 10 of the victims are civilians. This exercise tells you not only about mines, it tells you what a blessing it is to live in a place where you don't have to watch every day where you're putting your...
Chloe Plimmer and her colleagues have just made an important discovery. Whilst on patrol securing the outskirts of Basra, they've uncovered a large ammunition dump. Inside these rundown buildings a mile away from the city, enough shells to supply a squadron of tanks and countless artillery guns. The boxes say it comes from Jordan. It's thought the significant cash was moved here recently and was most likely hoarded by the Iraqi regime before the last Gulf War. Well, this might have been a chance discovery, but it really is a lucky break for the Desert Rats. This is nearly 1,000 rounds of tank ammunition that now won't be fired at them. This is the type of work Chloe loves, right at the heart of the action.
Royal Engineers is a fantastic job. You've got so much different things to deal with, you know, demolitions, bridge building, everything. It's just fantastic. I love it.
In a compound close to the main bridge into Basra, the Desert Rats are preparing a base that puts them within a mile of the city. Whilst engineers clear away rubble, a steady stream of prisoners of war are processed. Many have handed themselves in, afraid of fighting. Those Iraqi army units still left in the city have been targeting the compound with mortar fire at nights. In an attempt to remove anything that helps them, it's decided to blow up the lighting towers they've been aiming at. Preparations for entering Basra continue. Here, Royal Engineers use an armoured bridge layer to allow vehicles to easily cross a fractured oil pipe. It's essential frontline work.
We'll be following the tanks along. As they come to an obstacle, we'd move forward, cross that obstacle, recover the bridge if necessary, and then move on with them.
And the engineers' powerful tanks have another important role, disabling enemy vehicles. This armoured personnel carrier wouldn't go gracefully though. Attempts to tip it on its roof failing at first. But after a trench was dug, it eventually succumbed. And this won't be used again in the Iraqis' fight against coalition forces. Richard Gaisford on the outskirts of Basra.
The 12th day of the US and British aggression against our country, and as you know, the British colonialists and this Anglo-British campaign is aiming to achieve what it has always done in the past. As a colonizer, they wanted to partition and divide Iraq.
Especially Anglo-American colonialists work or follow the golden rule of British colonialism: divide and conquer. The British have worked hard for implementing this golden rule of the British colonialism in Iraq for more than 30 years during their rule in Iraq before 1958. And they failed to implement this rule because Iraq is one people. Iraq cannot be divided into clans and communities and ethnic groups and religious groups. This was the rule, this was the desire of British colonialism.
18-year-old Chris Finney survived the attack on his scimitar tank, another so-called friendly fire incident which claimed the life of his friend, a British soldier killed by an American pilot. Now Chris and his fellow troopers have condemned the pilot of the A-10 tank buster as trigger-happy. He twice opened fire on their scimitar as Chris tried desperately to warn him off.
I seen his face and all that. Noticed it was an American plane, but I didn't want to believe it was, because it's friendly, innit? And I was feeling scared and that, and signalling to him too that we were in fact friendly and not Iraqis and all the rest of it. And then there was just a sense of helplessness, like there's nothing I could do about it.
And when they started firing at you again, how did that feel?
Awful. It's just weird, really, really weird. And I just felt like there was nowhere I could run, because no one can outrun a plane, can they? So just stood there and hope for the best, really.
American Cobra helicopters have been spearheading the assault around Nasiriyah, their missiles pounding Iraqi positions along the banks of the river Euphrates. One aim of the American attack is to kill or capture some of those who are closest to Saddam, including his cousin, who's in charge of the Western Front and is known as Chemical Ali because of his alleged use of chemical weapons in previous military operations. These are the latest pictures which show the American attack outside Nasiriyah, again led by helicopter gunships. Here, US ground forces are seen capturing some buildings and discovering what appears to be an Iraqi armory. The continuing bombardment of Baghdad is also aimed at so-called regime targets. Here missiles struck around the Ministry of Information. A palace belonging to one of Saddam's sons has also been struck and partly destroyed. But in an interview with an American TV network, Iraq's Deputy Prime Minister remained defiant.
We can end this war when the invaders withdraw totally, unconditionally from the Iraqi territory.
Nothing less.
Nothing less.
There have been more air raid alerts and more explosions heard in Baghdad this morning. Paul Davis,
There have been two separate clashes here, Nick. There was a quite significant incident north of Basra, about 40 kilometers north of Basra, in which 17 Iraqi tanks, 5 artillery pieces, and 3 Iraqi armored personnel carriers were destroyed. Now, this wasn't a land battle. This was the result of forward observation by British troops who saw an Iraqi position at a place called MEDINA Bridge. This is about 10 kilometers ahead of the British front line. They called in air support, and that Iraqi position, which belonged to the Iraqi 5th Division, appears to have been wiped out. There were 2 companies, we're told, of infantry there. We believe around about 200 men. No prisoners were taken. As I say, it wasn't a land battle, it was an airstrike, and it's believed that that entire Iraqi position was destroyed. Now, that's quite significant in as much as it shows the vulnerability of conventional Iraqi forces on the ground, how easily targeted they can be by airstrikes. It also shows that the British reconnaissance operation, the observation operation, is pushing further and further north. We don't know whether that's going to continue or not, but this was well outside the immediate Basra area. The part of Basra that you were referring to earlier in Paul Davis's report is in the hands of the Royal Marines, but it remains, it's a suburb called Abu al-Khasib. It's almost a village on the outskirts of Basra. As I say, that remains in the hands of the Royal Marines, but it's still a volatile area, and the whole area around Basra still presents considerable danger to the British soldiers who are fighting here.
I was going to say to you, Tim, I mean, Basra, describe it as a running sore, can't we? It's proving dreadfully difficult to get anything like control in that area.
Well, the difficulty is the way that the military want to approach this. As you'll remember, and we've talked about this on a number of occasions, initially it was almost a softly approach. Hold back, isolate the city, don't cause any collateral damage. Gradually that is changing. The patrolling in Basra, especially at night, is becoming a little bit more aggressive. More offensive tactics are being employed. But it's still very important to the British military that they don't cause damage to the civilian population and that they don't imprison them. We're told repeatedly here, this is not a siege. They're striking targets in Basra, they're targeting still officials of Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party, but they want the Iraqi civilians inside Basra to have the freedom to come and go, and they're still trying to allow that to happen as much as possible.
Coalition air power struck the Republican Guard's Medina division, destroying nearly 50% of its tanks. They say scores of Republican Guard soldiers there surrendered and that Baghdad is sending more Guard forces to that region. US military officials say that elsewhere in central Iraq, coalition troops engaged a significant number of Iraqi paramilitaries near Najaf, killing more than 100 of them and taking about 50 prisoners. The Pentagon also tells CNN that US Special Forces discovered an expansive set of tunnels under a so-called terrorist training camp near the northeastern Iraqi town of Kerma.
Can you tell us what that was all about?
Absolutely, Nick. Further proof, if we needed any, really, that Iraqi resistance is continuing, and it's continuing outside the cities and towns of this country. Over the past 24 hours, the troops that I'm with, and these troops are the northernmost of the British troops, northwest of Basra, they've been engaging Iraqi targets. I've just been speaking to the commanding officer of this regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Duncan Francis, and he was telling me about the kind of targets they'd engaged and indeed taken out, and the list includes 25 tanks, 12 artillery pieces, a number of armoured vehicles, and indeed infantry troops as well. It's important to stress that these Iraqi units weren't invading, they weren't advancing towards us as much as just taking pot shots in our area. We had shells coming down around us, some of them close, but they were mainly targets that had been observed and were being taken out. What really is going on here is some kind of holding operation. They're holding the troops back, the 3 Iraqi army divisions that are to the north of here, so that the Americans can concentrate on Baghdad. The hope is, of course, that Baghdad will fall, and then simply we won't have to worry about these divisions to the north of us anymore. But in the meantime, the troops that I'm with are holding them off.
Now, Philip, I know you're often not allowed to tell us exactly where you are, and of course you mustn't discuss plans at all, but can you give us some indication of your location there? Can the camera widen a little bit to show us what's going on around you?
Well, I can show you what's going on around us. We can move the shot around a little bit. We are, of course, on video phone, so I'm not sure how good the shot will be. But in effect, what we have here today is we're at a refinery, an oil refinery, that some of the batteries of this artillery have been brought to for actually a day of R&R, rest and relaxation. After 24 hours of fighting, we have a time to have a shower. There is running water in this area, one of the few places in this area that has running water, and a place to wash clothes. And the commanding officer of the regiment says it's really a measure of how confident he is of having things under control, that he can take a battery from this regiment, give them a day off like this, and keep control of the situation.
But it's obviously a very tense business, Philip, isn't it? Any thought that this was going to be quick and easy? It sounds like it's going to be a lot of these sort of mopping up operations going on for a long, long time.
That's absolutely right, and that's really the point of today for these men and women here having this day off, is because they envisage a long war. They say they can stay here as long as is necessary. They're not going to take on these divisions that I mentioned to the north unless they have to. They merely want to hold them back and, as I say, hope that things in Baghdad will overtake the events here, and that simply they will cut the head off of the snake, as it were, and take care of the whole country by taking care of Baghdad.
Well, Philip Ray-Smith, you'll be delighted to know that your pictures are very clear indeed, even though they do come via video phone. Thank you.
Operational pause, as many have speculated, but that the attacks on the key elements of the Iraqi regime, including those all-important Republican Guard divisions guarding the southern approaches to Baghdad, continue. We now know that they're being hit from the air by artillery, and in the last 24 hours or so we understand the first sorties on the ground by some of the lead American Army elements, probing, exploring how much damage has been done to those Republican Guard units and getting ready for the big battle which still lies ahead.
Brigadier General Vincent Brooks at Central Command.
Remember those who have lost their lives and their families. The coalition attacked regime targets over the last 48 hours in Baghdad and several cities throughout the country. Additionally, there were precision attacks against surface-to-surface missiles and Republican Guard forces. Our efforts are focused on